This is a book full of great essays, and of course, I urge you to read the whole book, the whole thing. The 7 essays under language, 17 pieces about individual writers, including several people in this room, under the titular heading Pitch. The comic, deadly serious epilogue under Bent Studies, which is a catalog of recalcitrants of radical anti-sectarianism, my favorite aspect of Charles Bernstein's work, radical anti-sectarianism. And a source work, this list is, for what I take to be Charles's most significant contribution, which is his incessant anti-intellectualism. It's not intellectualism, but it's opposed to anti-intellectualism, which is why he has readers all over. But if you can't do all that reading, I think you should start with the 11 collaboratively written essays under the title Echopoetics. For there you will find the heart of this great poet critic's intellectual generosity and aesthetic flexibility. Echopoetics, E-C-H-O, Echopoetics, is a poetry of call and response, and its poetic theory and, frankly, affirmed values are all here variously in these essays and statements and programmatic dicta and talks and conversations. Echopoetics is pitched at you here, opaque yet direct, full of the impossibly restless curiosity that is characteristic of Charles Bernstein as a personal temperament, calling constantly for the dialogue between reason and imagination, for collaboration, always founded on patacherical qualities, for midrashic antinomianism. I've always wanted to use that phrase in an introduction, but it works in this case. In fact, it may be even your phrase. It is, yeah. Made happily weak rather than strong by overreading, clumsy, erroneous, freakish, foreign, in the sense historically denounced by anti-Semites, foreign, incongruous, anomalous, polyverse, to borrow from Leanne Brown, paracritical, to borrow from, among other people, Jerome McGann, contradictory, borrowing from Marx and Whitman taken together, artificial, borrowing from Oscar Wilde, degenerate, again turning around that fascist valence, bent, pigeon, non-standard, anti-absorptive, thick, hyperbolic, feverishly pitched. So let's pitch in, he says. Pitch is, of course, the sound of poetry, for one thing, something Charles has thought about as deeply in the last 25 years or so as anyone. Pitch is register. Pitch is also the attack or the approach, the angle. This new book, Pitch of Poetry, makes Bernstein's best pitch yet for the progressive efficacy of dialogic critical encounters. And that phrase is his, the last part. For truly, you can't evict an idea. A concept applied in this book to occupy that has its origins for Charles in European modernist anti-fascism in the 1930s. You have to love originality so much you keep on copying it. Thus, monotony, that's okay, such as that produced by Charles Reznikoff's monolithic testimony. Monotony means there is a work of writing that speaks not for itself, but as itself. Charles's goal, finally, after all these years, is to discover a pitched state or situation in which he can speak as himself. When he praises Raymond Federman's Take It or Leave It by commending how such work, quote, shows that digression and the comic can weave their way around an empty center without betraying it, he is, I think, striving to speak about himself in the ideal of the writing life. Thus, of course, poetry, in particular poetry, is necessary, is the answer to the question, can the authorities come banging in and evict an idea? Poetry. To write prose after Auschwitz is barbaric. In a section of the essay, this picture intentionally left blank, and the section I'm thinking of is entitled Letter from Warsaw, and I found it terribly moving. Charles describes his and Susan B.'s and Tracy Morris's visit together to Warsaw and to Łódź, or Łódź. His first trip there. Susan's mother was born in Jewish pre-war Poland, moved to Berlin with her family, the mother did, when she was 5, whereupon the diasporic journey of that family began that rendered them multilinguistic survivors and artists. And Charles realized at that moment, visiting, that he is, to quote him, someone whose intellectual and cultural foundations are European. And by that he means to refer to dislocation, alienation, and thus a very specifically historical form of radicalism. And he stood on the ground, as he puts it, on the ground of a great experiment from the decade before I was born, which aimed to expel difference in order to increase harmony through sameness. But the move toward homogenization versus miscegenation is powerful in the Americas as well, since the Poetics of the Americas is a continuation of European poetics by other means. And so, after years of reading and hearing his poetry, criticism, interviews, reviews, collaborations, librettis, and translations, we, new readers, old readers, readers who followed him through the years, we here in this book come upon an origin story of this poet's pitch for difficulty and difference. The power of American poetry, he writes, comes from the mixing of many languages and the resistance to the dominance of any one language, including English, or proper English anyway. It is the overturning of standard English by second languages and vernacular dialect speakers that defines American poetry, quote unquote. The pitch of poetry not only embraces such values, but in its epilogue actually lists them under a heading, and it seemed to me to come right out of like early 1950s comprehensive encyclopedic attempts to happily say everything. It's obviously an ironic turn on that. Under the heading, Positive Literary Terms of Art. Among them, estrangement, stuttering, deformative, stray marks, disprosodic, distressed, aversive, non-standard. Although he's been called to this podium many, many times over the years, it's not been often enough to read from his own work. So let us welcome and show our appreciation for and love for our dear distressed, aversive, non-standard friend, Charles Bernstein.